Glancing down the interminable Brooklyn street, you thought of those joined brownstones as one house reflected through a train of mirrors, with no walls between the houses, but only vast rooms, yawning endlessly, one into the other. Yet, looking close, you saw that under the thick ivy, each house had something distinctly its own. Some touch that was Gothic, Romanesque, Baroque, or Greek triumphed amid the Victorian clutter. Here, Ionic columns framed the windows, while next door, gargoyles scowled up at the sun. There, the cornices were hung with carved foliage, while gorgon heads decorated the others. Many houses had bay windows of Gothic stonework. A few boasted turrets raised high above the other roofs. Yet, they all shared the same brown monotony. All seemed doomed by the confusion in their design. Behind those grim facades,
in those high rooms, life soared and ebbed. In her novel, Brown Girl, Brownstones, author Paule Marshall used a typical Brooklyn brownstone as a symbol of her family's struggle to adapt to life in a new world, and in doing so, offering an intimate look at the hopes and dreams of millions of West Indian immigrants living in the United States. This is the story of a CUNY graduate who became a MacArthur Fellow and her lifelong passion for writing. Born in 1929 as Valenza Pauline Burke to a family of Barbadian immigrants in Brooklyn, New York, Paule was expected to fit the mold and find practical means of sustaining her livelihood. After Paule's father decided to leave the family and join a religious cult in Harlem, her mother Ada was left with little understanding for her daughter's affinity for writing. Ironically, it was her mother's everyday conversations with other Bayesian housewives and mothers in the kitchen of their brownstone that initially inspired Paule to become a writer. "I grew up around poets," she later recalled in her essay, From the Poets in the Kitchen. "They taught me my first lessons in the narrative art. They trained my ear. They set a standard of excellence. This is why the best of my work must be attributed to them. It stands as testimony to the rich legacy of language and culture they so freely pass on to me in the workshop of the kitchen." After being introduced to poet and novelist Paul Laurence Dunbar and his exceptional ability to capture Southern Black dialect as poetry, her thirst for the written word became unquenchable. Out of respect for her fellow writer, but also believing that her explicitly female name may hurt her prospects when applying for jobs in journalism, Pauline Marshall decided to drop the end of her given name and change it to a more masculine form, Paul. Suggestively, and most likely out of spite, she decided to keep the E silent as a potent reminder of her sacrifice. At the tender age of 13, however, she still wouldn't dare to consider herself a writer, at least not under her mother's watch. In 1949, Paule enrolled in Hunter College, with plans of becoming a social worker. Soon after, however, she contracted tuberculosis and spent a year recovering in a local sanatorium. As luck would have it, this unfortunate period of her life had a surprisingly positive outcome. The time spent at the sanatorium allowed her to immerse herself in books, and after recovering, she firmly decided to pursue a degree in English literature at Brooklyn College. It was here at Brooklyn College that she had her first taste of creative writing and started working on her first book, Brown Girl, Brownstones. In this semi-autobiographical novel, published in 1959, a girl named Selena lives with her Barbadian parents in a typical Brooklyn brownstone. This brownstone becomes the main point of contention between her belligerent parents, a father who longs to return to Barbados, and a mother who sees the ownership of the brownstone as the only true way of achieving the American dream. Using Selena's growing pains to capture the essence of the Afro-Caribbean immigrant experience, Paule Marshall became one of the first Black female writers to reach wider recognition by tackling problems of race, gender, class, and cultural identity. Yet for Paule, this was a very personal book. It served in many ways as a rite of passage so I could move from my childhood, so I could take up my life and move forward, she later wrote. And move forward she did. After graduating from Brooklyn College in 1953, Paule started writing for a living. Her first job at Our World, a popular magazine for African American readers, taught her discipline in writing and informed her on contemporary trends in Black communities across the United States. In her capacity as staff travel journalist, she visited Brazil and the Caribbean islands, and there had some of her first experiences with Black communities outside the United States. Her career as a journalist, however, was short-lived. In 1961, after publishing a collection of novellas titled Sold, Clap Hand, and Sing, Paule was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the following year received the Rosenthal Family Foundation Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Now officially recognized, Paule's work caught the eye of Langston Hughes, and in 1965, he invited her to join him on his state-sponsored European tour. This experience had a major impact on her career as a writer. Under the wing of this giant of African-American literary canon, Paule developed a stronger sense of her Pan-African identity, and in the following years started looking for inspiration outside of the boundaries of her individual experience, from West Africa to South America, the West Indies to the southern United States. Her stories drew their power from the histories of people spread across 3 different continents, yet belonging to one cultural identity, one people divided by the ocean.
When you walk along the Atlantic, you can hear a kind, and as it comes in a powerful waves, it's as if it's tearing itself apart. And you know, the whole ritual in Shiva is the Jewish ritual of mourning, that the women, sort of tear their clothes and so on. As I walked, the first time I walked along the Atlantic in Barbados, I said, this sea is sitting Shiva for the tyranny that took place.
This reinforced sense of self led Paule to become active in the civil rights movement and Black nationalist movements of the 1960s. Yet equally important was her role in the Black feminist movement. As one of the first female writers to explore the role of a Black woman in contemporary American society, Paule had a major influence on the wave of Black female writers that emerged in the 1960s and 70s, including such names as Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, and Alice Walker. Traditionally in most fiction, men are the wheelers and dealers. They are the ones in whom power is invested, she wrote in 1979. I wanted to turn that around. I wanted women to be the centers of power. Virtually every book that Paule wrote in her long career featured a strong female character, a Black woman deeply affected by both the limitations of her current condition as well as the long history of suffering of her people. Yet, a woman powerful enough to break through those limitations and find inner means for change and spiritual awakening. In 1992, at the age of 63, Paule received a MacArthur Fellowship. Paule Marshall is a writer of fiction who engages social issues without compromising the nuances of her powerfully realized characters, the foundation concluded. In her intricately crafted novels, Marshall explores the theme of healing, the healing of divided selves, divided cultures, and a divided world. In her memoir, Triangular Road, published in 2009, Paule Marshall identified herself as a tripartite person, a woman equally defined by her African roots, Barbadian ancestry, and her upbringing here in Brooklyn, New York. And while Paule's mother never achieved the American dream of owning a brownstone in Brooklyn, her daughter's powerful writing opened those same brownstones to millions of people and shared that unique kitchen poetry of her childhood with the world.